So today in this video, I'm going to be sharing 5 truths that I learned while working in Japanese automotive. So a little bit of background, just over 2 decades ago, this sounds crazy when I say 2 decades, but 2 decades ago, I started working for this Japanese automotive company. And my first major role there was in quality assurance. And so basically my role was that anytime a defect occurred at the customer, which was Honda of North America, or if an internal defect occurred, I was responsible of investigating that defect, especially if it was going to impact the customer. Now that you have that background, let's get into the truths. And truth number 1 is that problems should be treated with a sense of urgency, especially if it's a customer related problem. In fact, a few times during my working career at this Japanese company, I saw 20-hour days. Now listen, I didn't see a lot of 20-hour days, but I did see some 20-hour days. These days, I don't do that anymore. But back then, when I was an engineer early on in my career, things have changed in the last 20 years. I don't think people do that anymore. Back then, it happened, right? 20-hour days didn't happen a lot. 15, 16, 18-hour days, they were more common. But what is important about that is that it impressed upon me the sense of urgency when we had a customer-related issue. Now, when I say sense of urgency, I don't want you to think we're running around like a bunch of crazy people. I just mean that there's special emphasis placed on that problem by the entire team. And the best way to do that is to make sure you have a problem-solving process in place. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share a little about a problem-solving tool that I learned at the Japanese company that I think you'll enjoy. But first, I want you to think about a few questions you can ask yourselves to see if you have a good process in your business or company with problem solving. And number 1 is, do you have a procedure in place right now for solving problems? And number 2, if you do have a procedure in place for solving problems, is it clear? Does everyone know where to find it? And can everyone access that problem solving procedure? Number 3, do you know who does what and when? Meaning, are there roles and responsibilities for solving problems in your business? Number 4, is there an escalation strategy when things aren't progressing? Meaning that, do you know what to do if things are not progressing at the right speed, if members of the team are not performing in the right way or taking the same sense of urgency as the rest of the team? Is there an escalation strategy in place? And don't worry, in a moment, I'm going to tell you why these things matter. And number 5, do you have a reporting and sign-off plan? Meaning that when you're done with the problem investigative analysis, do you have a reporting method to report out the story to say, hey, this is what happened. This is what the analysis is, our investigation. This is what we found. This is the countermeasure. This is why it's never going to happen again. And here's the report. And then do you have a sign-off method for that? Meaning that, do you have people that are really experienced in problem solving? Sometimes these are executive leaders of the business that you go to and have them sign off and say, we approve this. We agree with the investigative analysis. We agree with the countermeasure, corrective actions, and we agree that this will never happen again based off what your team has done. And if you don't have these things, it's imperative that you have one in place. For example, when I was an engineer at this Japanese company, we had 36 hours to resolve a problem. 36 hours to go from the problem exists to we have a corrective action or countermeasure in place, guaranteeing it will never happen again. And then we have 5 days to report out the story, meaning that we had 5 days to put it all together in this format that we could report out and say, hey, here's the story and here's what we did to resolve it. Now, we reported out to the senior execs and I called them the 4 horsemen. I don't know how I coined that term that still gets used today, I believe, at that same company, but I call them the 4 horsemen, and they were made up of 3 Japanese executives or leaders of the business and 1 American, the highest ranking American, and then the 3 highest ranking Japanese members. And the process was always the same. Once I went through the entire story, I would say that concludes the investigative analysis. I'd like to now open up for questions, and then I would proceed to bring out a pen and pad because I knew it was about to happen. The leading Japanese member would always say, very calmly, Chetson, thank you for your investigation. I have a couple of questions. And then they would just commence with, redlining my entire 5P, my entire process of problem solving. Now, I'm going to go over in a minute why that was very beneficial for me, but at the time it was very tough, very humbling. And I'm going to tell you a little secret I did to overcome this in the very end. Now, a little side note here, I do want to say that they were never disrespectful to me. Even when they were tearing you down and you knew they were asking you questions that you didn't know the answer to and you were going to have to really dig deep on this and you knew that you missed something and they're just calling you out on it, they did it respectfully. They didn't do it in a way to make me feel less about myself. Any emotions that I had where I felt less about myself as an engineer came from myself. And that's the thing about these types of roles, and especially if you're a high performer, I want you to know something. We are insecure overachievers. I've heard that term used about folks in this field, consultants too, that a lot of the big 3 consulting firms look for people that are insecure overachievers. We're always self-critical. We're always trying to improve ourselves. Go see my last video on Kaizen. It talks a lot about that and what Kaizen actually necessarily means. Very critical of ourselves, but we also overachieve. We want to be really good at what we do. So it's okay if you're self-critical, just don't stay there too long. Now, what was the little secret that I did to overcome some of the stress that was involved with them asking me questions and me never having the right answer? And that was keeping a running list. When they would ask me questions, I would start keeping a list of those questions. And every time I was tasked with doing root cause analysis or solving some sort of a problem, I would bring out that list, run through the questions, make sure that my report had every one of those questions answered before I went into the room. And eventually the questions stopped and they would just say, thank you, Jatson, and I was on to my next project or task. One common pitfall that I see a lot with managers that aren't very familiar with root cause analysis is they may drive their team to a time constrained window in such that the person, the team, the engineer who's doing the investigative analysis cuts corners and doesn't get to the real root cause. Now, on the other side of the coin, I've seen some management teams at companies not even put any sort of timeline constraints on root cause analysis and investigation, meaning that the window just stays open and people can just keep doing problem solving forever and it never gets to some sort of resolution. And that's also a pitfall I want you to avoid. We should always be fostering an environment of teamwork where teams come together to solve a problem, putting constraints on that problem, meaning that we need a timeline to say we need this done in a certain amount of time, but also allowing the freedom to go over that if they need to get to the real root cause of a problem. Now, the problem-solving tool that we use to collect the data throughout the process and use the same tool to report out to the 4 horsemen known as the executive team was called the 5 principles of problem solving, or the 5P. And the reason I love the 5P is because the entire story, from the problem statement all the way through the investigative analysis, the findings, the pictures, all the way to the resolution and countermeasure and corrective actions, it was all captured on an 11 by 17 sheet of paper, meaning that it was like an entire story of the problem right there in front of us that you could easily see. Now, I encourage you to do more research about that, or just type 5P down in the comment section below, and maybe I'll do a video on the 5P. Now, before we get to truth number 2, which you're gonna love, I wanna talk about one thing. And that is that I make videos that help people with their career. If this video or any of my videos are helping you with your career, I want you to just tap out on that like button below. It would mean the world to me. It only takes a second for you, but it means so much to me because it helps promote the video to others so they can get help as well. Truth number 2 is have a process in your business for solving problems. Your process is your standard, right? So if you don't have a process for solving problems, you don't have a standard for solving problems. And Taiichi Ohno said, without a standard, there can be no improvement. Now, if you don't have one and you want to develop some sort of problem-solving process, I want you to consider a few things. Number 1 is, do you have a kickoff activity? And this kickoff activity is to notify the team that there is a problem. And I don't mean like send out an email. That's not good enough. You need to bring the team together, especially if you're at a site. You can bring everyone together in a room or at the place where the actual problem happened, also called the Gemba, right? We talk about this a lot in my videos, but you want to make sure you bring the team together and say, hey, here's what's happened. Now, I get it. There are far-flung teams and virtual teams. If that's the case, then bring everyone together in teams. Some sort of a virtual meeting space. Make sure you bring those folks together in that space. Number 2 is timeline. You always want to have a timeline because it creates that sense of urgency we've talked about. Number 3, you need a core team, right, to help with the investigation. Number 4, you need a data collection and reporting method. I talked about the 5P, but it could be an 8D. I've used all kinds of things, right? 8D, 5P, 7-step, 8. There's all kinds of problem-solving processes out there. Just pick one that best fits your needs and use that one. Number 5, you need an escalation strategy. We talked about that already, but you got to have an escalation strategy so that you know what to do and everyone knows what to do when things aren't progressing fast enough. What I love about the escalation strategy as well is that if you use that in the first step, which is kick off and notify the team, it tends to never get used because everyone already knows what's going to happen if progress isn't being made correctly and fast enough, right? And so that escalation strategy does a couple of things. Number 1, it gives you the process to move on if things are not progressing. But number 2, it almost mitigates any problems because you share that escalation strategy up front and everybody's aware of what's going to happen. Number 6, you need some way of reporting and signing off. Now, I talked about the 4 horsemen and bringing everyone together in one room to go over the investigative analysis and the resolution and how it got signed off. I'm not saying you have to do that, but you need some way to close the loop on the problem. Number 7, you need a communication method at the very end also to notify everyone of the results, right? Now, this can be an email. I'm okay with that. You can send out an email and say, here's what happened. Here's what we found. We've signed off the investigative analysis and the report. And number 8, feed forward, right? Feed forward to other business units that you might have. You probably help them resolve any issues they may be having. 90%, okay, I made that number up. A lot of problems fail to get to the root cause, right? A lot of people just do not get to the root cause of a problem. And that means that that problem will resurface and come up again, right? And this is because most of the time when people go into problem solving, they don't do the one thing I talk about a lot, and that is you got to define the the problem correctly. And that leads me to truth number 3, which is spend 90% of your time finding the problem. Okay, 90% isn't always 90%. Sometimes it's 80, sometimes it's 85. Whatever it is, you need to be spending a majority of your time defining the problem. In fact, Albert Einstein said that if he had 60 minutes, 1 hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about the solution. So if Albert Einstein is, he's pretty smart, right? He's a pretty smart guy, was a smart guy. If he spends that much time thinking about the problem, really defining the problem, we should be doing the same thing. Now, when it comes to problems and people think they have a good grasp on what the problem is. If I had $1 for every time someone said, Chad, I already know what the problem is, I would be a millionaire and retired, and I wouldn't be doing this video, right? I'd probably still be doing the videos because I like helping people, but I get that answer all the time, right? You probably do too. I already know what the answer is, Chad. I know what the problem is. So here's what I do. I ask people to articulate that on pen and pad, and that's usually where it falls apart. And 99% of the people simply cannot tell you on pen and pad what the problem is because they don't know how to write a problem statement, but you will after this video. Here's a simple process you can do. And I use this on the 5P actually, and I still use this same process to this day, the 5 W's and 2 H's. And those are the who, what, when, where, why. 5 W's and 2 H's are how and how many. Truth number 4, be open to coaching. Now, when you're 25 years old, getting your 5P red line by the people that I call the 4 horsemen, even in that mindset of calling them the 4 horsemen, I wasn't in the mindset of getting coaching. I should have seen them for the wise experts and basically the best problem solvers I've ever met. I should have seen them for those types of people, but instead I saw them as the 4 horsemen, right? Mind you, some of these Japanese teachers were in their 60s, way more experienced than me. However, one of my Japanese colleagues or senseis pulled me aside one day after one of the 5P meetings and said something I'll never forget. In his wonderfully broken but succinct English, he first checked on me, but then he said to me, Chad-san, remember, Japanese way is to tear down, but build back up stronger. And those words changed my perspective on pretty much everything, even to this day with coaching. So I would say be open to coaching. Once I opened myself up to coaching, I kept my mouth shut and my ears open, I 2X'd my learning. So be smarter than young Chad and make sure you listen, be open to coaching. And the truth number 5 is to understand the failure mechanism. And I'm going to explain that in detail. But before I do, I want to talk about some free resources you can get. This is stuff I want to give you just for hanging out with me today. And there are 2 ways you can access this free information right here on YouTube. The first way is that if you're on a desktop computer right now or after the video, you can just navigate up to the banner at the top of this YouTube page and find a link there on the far right hand side. The second way is on any device that you're on, it doesn't matter if you're a mobile device or on a desktop computer. If you just clicked on any video, even this one, and click see more, then you'll have access to some links there. Click on those links and it'll give you some free resources. And I also have a website. Did you know that? I do. I have a website. You can click over there as well. Links in the description below. And I started a blog, vlog, video log, whatever it is, videos over there from the YouTube channel so that you can just search and find videos you need to help you out quicker than trying to do this on YouTube. Now, the failure mechanism of a problem that I mentioned is the switch that turns the problem on and off. When you reach the root cause of a problem, you can turn that problem on and off at will. This was one of the things that I had to do no matter what when I worked for the Japanese company. I had to be able to turn the mechanism on and off, meaning that I had to recreate the failure. So let me give you an example. We made the electronic control boards, as I mentioned before, right? They were called ECUs, electronic control units or engine control units. They control the function, the brain of the automobile, the brain of the engine. Now, when you talk about electronics, sometimes you'll have shorts, meaning that the leads on the components on the IC's integrated circuits, you might have a short where a piece of metal gets between the 2 leads and causes the board to fail. If we had a situation like that, I had to remove that piece of metal. Then I would have to analyze that piece of metal on the spectrometer, which gave me the makeup of that metal. And then I would have to go out and find out where else did we have that type of makeup. Then I would have to say, okay, now I know where we find that type of metal. I need to recreate the size and shape of it. And then I would have to find other metal that had the same shape or form where it might have come off and got lodged into or between the leads. And this would give me the indication that that's where that piece of metal came from. And now we need to figure out how do we stop that metal from happening in that area. Then I could turn the mechanism on and off, right? I could recreate the metal. I could recreate that situation. And the last thing I'll leave you with is always drive down to the root cause at the process level. That's where the root cause really is. Don't forget to grab those free resources down in the description below. As always, thank you for supporting this channel. We are a small niche and I really appreciate you being here and being part of this team. I really feel like we're a team, a community. I feel like that's what this is becoming. 14,000 subscribers now. Thank you so much. If you want to grab those free resources, they're around. I showed you how to get those. Make sure you tap out on that like button if you like this video. Click the bell notification as well. That way you can get notified when I release new videos. Check out my website, search for videos over there. I'm trying to give you as much information as I can. And I'll end it the way I always end my videos. I'll see you in the next one.